Last time we installed the cylinder head. This time we work on our timing. First, we're going to install the oil pump. I'm installing a ported K20 oil pump on this K24 block. This will prevent the oil from cavitating at higher RPMs and frees up some horsepower due to not having balance shafts. When doing this conversion, there's an oil jet that needs to be plugged, otherwise your oil pressure will fall too low, causing engine failure. I used a 1/8 27 MPT tap on the hole for the oil jet and installed a pipe plug with some Honda Bond to plug up the hole. I would recommend doing this earlier in your build so you're not dealing with any metal shavings contaminating your assembly. With the oil jet hole plugged, we can install the baffle held on by 6 6mm bolts, torqued to 8.7 foot-pounds. Align the dowel pins on the oil pump to the holes on the block and use a rubber mallet to tap the oil pump into place. Torque the two 8mm bolts to 16 foot-pounds and the 6mm bolt to 8.7 foot-pounds. Now we install the crankshaft timing gear. Keep turning the gear until the dowel on the backside sits in the dowel hole in the crankshaft. This is when I realized the oil pump chain can't be installed with the oil pump already torqued down, so we need to loosen the oil pump, get the chain around the gear, and reinstall the pump. Note that the oil pump does not have any timing specifications. There's no interference and it's not synchronized with any other components. With the pump chain on, we can install the chain guide. I also added this aftermarket bottom timing chain guide. This is another precaution that in theory would not allow the timing chain to jump off the sprocket and cause major engine failure. These are held on by two 6mm socketed cap screws torqued to 8.7 foot-pounds. Now we install the chain tensioner held on by three 6mm bolts torqued to 8.7 foot-pounds. Now we loosen the upper timing chain guide to make room for installing the chain. Note that this guide is from a K20Z3. It's longer and covers the cam gears, which acts as another safety precaution to keep the timing chain from jumping off the sprocket. Now we turn our crankshaft until the mark on the gear and the mark on the block line up as shown here. With the crankshaft in position, the cams now need to be turned so that the dots and arrows are up top and the lines are on the inside and lined up with one another. On the other side of the motor, the camshafts have holes in them to help with positioning. I just used Allen wrenches to keep them fixed in place. The timing chain we use is from a K24, and we need to align the gold links with the markings on the cam gears. Make sure the markings are between the two gold links on the timing chain. Without tension on the chain, they may want to jump out of position. I found it helpful to use the upper chain guide to temporarily hold them in place. On the crank gear, there's a third gold link that needs to align with the marking on the gear itself, shown here. It's tough to see, but it's about in the 7 o'clock position. I removed the oil pump guide so the camera had a better view. Next, we install the K24 chain guide and tensioner arm. The tensioner arm is held on by a special 8mm shoulder bolt torqued to 16 foot-pounds. The chain guide is held on by three 6mm bolts torqued to 8.7 foot-pounds. Yep, I broke another bolt. And I'm balding. I tried using the same method I did on my last video with the broken bolt in the cylinder head, but my ape-like hands managed to get the bolt extractor stuck in it as well. The solution I came up with was to 3D print a jig that used the existing holes to bolt up to the motor. I pressed in a piece of steel tube to guide my carbide drill bit to remove the broken pieces. Then I stepped up the size of the drill bit so I could use an M10 tap to create new threads for a larger bolt. I went through the timing process again and installed the timing chain guide. I also didn't want to risk it anymore, so I did the job the right way. I bought all new OEM hardware for the remainder of this engine build. I recommend you learn from my mistakes and do the same. With that potential disaster avoided and the timing chain in place, we do one last check to make sure all the markings still line up. Camshaft with the gold links, camshafts with one another, crank gear with the engine block, and crank gear with the gold link. Now we install our timing chain tensioner that's held on by two 6mm bolts torqued to 8.7 foot-pounds. With everything in place, we pull the pin on our chain tensioner, give the crank a couple careful turns to make sure nothing's interfering and that all of our markings line back up. That concludes all the internal components of this motor. Next time we're going to work on some of the components on the outside and we're going to run into more hardware issues. But until then, thanks for watching and take care.